All right, form them waveforms.
That's what we do here. We form waveforms. That is our chief export. The chief export of the Sad Boys Book Club is waveforms.
Waveformy, senpai.
Waveforms and knowledge. Or
Knowledgeable
opinions,
waveforms.
reviews. That's kind of what this is, right? That's why we can do this. It's essentially a review, and it's a little bit it's poorly done academic criticism mixed with like good old fashioned review.
Yeah, it's a review for the layman, for people like us who are not academically inclined, like the various scholars referenced in the footnotes of the House of Leaves, many of which I'm confident don't exist, and even if they do exist, I would tell them to maybe go outside and get some air because their farts do not smell as good as they think they do.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's that's kind of what it is. It's a group. It's two people, two guys who are rebuilding their brains after 2 decades plus of internet exposure.
Yeah.
That's basically what this whole thing is.
Yeah. And with that, welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. My name's Dusty.
And I'm Daniel.
And this is going to be our final episode on the House of Leaves. Thank Christ.
Yeah, I think it's I'm comfortable saying that I definitely enjoyed this book. I guess I'll go ahead and just do this here at the top. I definitely enjoyed it, but there are aspects of it that I felt maybe overstayed their welcome, and by proxy kind of gave the book a little bit of well, I don't know. I think it impacted my enjoyment of the book. Although, as I said again, up top, this is kind of an experiment to rebuild my brain of sorts after 2 decades of internet exposure and at least a decade of not serious like nose to the grindstone. Like I am like really reading. So I think there's a lot of things that if I had been sharper, if I was more ready to like get into like serious kind of like literary stuff. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. If I was like really ready to like do some serious heavy literary analysis, I think I probably would have enjoyed aspects of it more. But I think on the whole, it still tells, I guess, two compelling stories that kind of intersect.
Yeah. Yeah, since we're starting with our just global review of the book as a whole, which I think is a good idea. I'm gonna just throw a number on this. I'm gonna give this book a straight 7 out of 10. I liked it. I'm one of those people where I know for a lot of publications and a lot of review sites and whatnot, you see a number like a 7 and you think mediocre to bad, and anything under a 7 is just awful. I am firmly of the opinion that an average, by the numbers, not good, not bad, just milk toast, middle of the road, anything, is a 5 out of 10. Right in the middle of the score. So when I say a 7 out of 10, I mean that it's good, but it is a questionable recommendation. It's very much I would recommend this if I feel like this is up your alley, otherwise, take it for what you will. This is exactly where I place American Psycho as well.
I think that's very fair. This is one that I would find hard to recommend to. It would have to be a very particular kind of person, or at the very least someone that is very, very bookish, or is very into, like, I would say if I still had friends in grad school, that maybe they might get a kick out of it, or they could kind of get a little bit of a chuckle at the satire of academic criticism that we're seeing here. I think it's definitely something that's for that crowd. I bet they would find that. I found it amusing as well, but they would definitely, because it's their world, they would find more. They would be able to get more from that, I would say.
Yeah. Which, real quick, I want to throw a small little shout out real quick to my friend Cammy, who recently acquired a copy of this book and may or may not start reading it in the not in the immediate future, but in the soon to be future. We've talked about it a little bit, and she's following the podcast, but not hasn't listened to it yet because she does intend on reading the book. So, if she does eventually listen to the podcast after reading the book, hello, Cammy. I hope you enjoyed the book or didn't enjoy the book. I'm sure I will already know your thoughts on it by this point, through you telling me your thoughts on it. Yeah.
See, and that's why this is that's why this is a good podcast, and why publishers shouldn't come after us, because see, that's one sale already. I mean, come on.
Yeah. But I feel like, and I don't want to say this because I'm going from the last book I finished to the most recent book I finished. I feel like it really is an apt comparison to compare this book to something like American Psycho. Obviously not because of the genre. These are two completely different books in terms of like format and content. But they both fall into that line of satire, like you were saying, with it being literary satire, and with American Psycho being a more of like a consumerism satire. Whereas with this book, you get 13 pages talking about echoes. You get these really long rants about, not rants, I shouldn't say rants. You get these long referential pieces.
Passages.
Yeah, passages, that works too. Where it's and so had to say about this, and then they just have an entire paragraph that I imagine if you are part of these academic circles makes perfect sense to you, but someone like me who is a college dropout just stares at it and is like, these are words. These are very much words compiled in an order that makes a sentence, but I have no fucking clue what you're saying, so I'm just going to move on and just hope that the rest of the story makes sense, which it did, for the record. So, you get like moments like that, and I would compare that similarly to the snippets in American Psycho, where you have Patrick just going on and on and on and on, talking about what everyone's wearing, which I don't know fashion. I especially don't know fashion in the late 80s and early 90s. So I've been told that if you actually put these outfits together, everyone would look like a clown. Because nothing matches, everything clashes, and it's just ridiculous outfit combinations. But that's the joke if you're aware of fashion, and if you're not, it's just, it's pages and pages of just descriptors of, oh, the Jean Paul Gaultier vest on my I'm now forgetting all the names of designer clothing and whatnot because I am not into that scene. But point being is, it's in a similar vein to that, or when you have an entire chapter that's like 4 pages long where he's talking about Phil Collins, which I would argue is done better in the movie, which I'd argue most of which is done better in the movie.
But that's the thing. You have to know what it's about. Like the Phil Collins part, or the in the film, the Huey Lewis of the News discussion, that worked for me, because that is my medium of choice. That is the medium that I'm, I guess, most comfortable conversing about and most knowledgeable about. So for me, those parts are like, that's good, that's funny, that's amusing. But when you don't, I guess when you don't have knowledge of the topic that is being discussed, the satire doesn't work, and that's not inherently a fault of the satire. I guess it's just one of those things that it's just unfortunate that it's just going to fall flat if you're not in that intended audience.
Yeah, and to round it back to House of Leaves, so it doesn't sound like me just continuously talking about American Psycho again and again, which, it's my favorite movie, period. So I'm a little predisposed towards the book, even if I give it a 7 out of 10 as is. But in a similar vein to his long-winded discussions about clothing, about the restaurants they go to, the New York scene in the time, Phil Collins, Huey Lewis, Whitney Houston, whatever, all of that. In a similar vein with that, you get the same things in House of Leaves with all of these academic studies, these references, and all of these analyses that go into the nuance of the Navidson record, even to the point to where it's really weird details. Especially, I want to say this really quickly, It is somewhat relevant, but somewhat tangential. I really do not like the narrative that is built around Karen Green at all. Not from the Navidson record, but from the referential material from people from people analyzing her. I feel like everybody comes off immediately wanting to make her into some villain, some whore that only exists to be the not really necessarily the kryptonite of Navidson, but this like kind of albatross for him, where she's just this despicable, horrible human being that he's way better than, he deserves so much better, and she's just a horrible bitch that cheats on him. Which we did learn that she actually did cheat on him for real with some fashion idiot guy, which I don't really whatever. We can go into that later if you want to, but I don't really think it's super important. Yeah, she cheated on him, whatever. But I feel like there's this predisposed antagonistic view against Karen that I feel like is really unfair, and it's not to so much to say that because she made some mistakes and she did some things that betrayed Davidson. That is very true, and I don't want to sit there and make it sound like she's some saint that deserves no criticism whatsoever. She does deserve some criticism, to be fair, but she's a human. We all do dumb shit. We all make mistakes, but what you see in the Navidson record shows her to be someone who does love Navidson and care about him, despite him really doing everything he can to not receive that from her, just by the nature of who he is, which that's a different topic entirely that we can get into. But she cares and loves her children and her family in general. Tom, even Billy Reston, and all of this. So I feel like the Karen that we were given in the Navidson record is a flawed human who cares, and I feel like the view we are given about Karen from these armchair philosophizers who want to sit there and paint everything with broad strokes is this horrible woman who cheats and lies and keeps Navidson away from the things he truly loves, which I feel like is really unfair, and it just annoys me. And I realize that I'd like to think I'm in the right of this. Like how I'm feeling about it is I'd like to think this is what Danielewski was going for. Is that Karen is more than how she appears and how she is judged. So I don't hate
I
Karen.
think I think you're right. I think to a certain extent, and there are things that we learn about her. We learn about how she was sexually abused by her. Was it her father or her stepfather? I can't recall at the moment, but I think it was her stepfather. Do you know the incident where
In the well.
she was forced to be forced to be in the well. I think things like that, and then you see how people, and we should talk about this also, that her the way the way she was kind of the guardian, so to speak, for the early form of the Navidson record. The passage where she's kind of going around to all of these various experts and critics, and Stephen King somehow is worked in there at some point.
Yeah, I don't remember the context of it, but also we get a return of Anthony Kiedis and Kurt Cobain.
Oh yes. Yeah, that's something that we can look back. I know I took a record of that, but yeah, I think she is a person that is very. She does love her family. She's a good person. I think the way that I think Danielewski, the way he's framing the response to her within the world, I think is supposed to evoke that same emotion that you're feeling. That sort of like. You're like, wow, everybody's being really weird and misogynistic to her. I think that's it's a commentary on prominent women, especially how the public can seize maybe more on their foibles versus how the same things that in a man would not necessarily be as broadly discussed.
Yeah, I
If
think a
that makes
perfect
sense.
yeah, I think a perfect example of that does exist in the book itself with Delisle, because it's granted when we learn the truth of Delisle, it's much more tragic, but with Delisle, there's a lot of mystery surrounding it to the point where I think somebody even posits that it was a mistress he had across the sea when he was out doing his photojournalistic bullshit in wartime Sudan and all that. But it's always just kind of one of those things to where it's like when in Rome, it's one of those things that just happens. It's like he probably had a mistress, which even though Zampano makes it a point at some, I can't remember where exactly this is, but he makes it a point to say that Navidson was always faithful to Karen. I know that there was at least some theories of impropriety on his part due to Delisle, or the
Mm-hmm.
idea of it, and it wasn't helped by the fact that he would always dodge the question or just straight ignore it when asked about her. So, but my point being is that it's just kind of seen as just another one of those things. Oh, that Navidson. And then when with Karen with her, at the time, theoretical impropriety, it's automatically, oh, that whore. Can you believe she did that to Will Navidson? And then when we learn about her, I forgot the dude's name. I probably should look up the dude's name, but I don't think it's important enough to fixate on. But the fashion guy in New York, when she has her affair with him, twice, if I remember correctly, once before and then again after they leave the house. It's just seen as this big. It is definitely a moment of weakness for her, and I don't want to come across as somebody who just wants to hand wave cheating, because cheating is it's a betrayal of a relationship. There's a lot to go in with that, and it's definitely something that is a fault of her character, but I don't think it is something that is, especially given, I feel like context is important despite the fact that cheating is cheating regardless. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's important to look at the situation and understand that this is for her a moment of weakness and her scrambling to essentially find an answer or a solution, or at least anything, a way to disavow her from the house and the situation. And what Navidson was doing at the time was not only unhealthy for him, but unhealthy for her. So I can understand why. I do not condone or support her actions, but I can at least understand them. So I can not hand wave it, but just understand that Karen is a flawed character that had another moment of weakness where she went back to the man that she cheated on Davidson with before, and yeah, that's that. And even then, he even says in his interviews, which definitely feel to me like he was trying to milk the situation, that even when they were together, she felt distant and focusing more on wanting to be like being with him was a way for her to try and become closer to Navidson, which I can't personally understand how that mental gymnastic kind of works, where cheating on him makes her closer to him in the end. But whatever, say la vie. But it's just you look at the abuse that she went through as a child,
Mm-hmm.
and the absolute. I don't want to. It's almost mental abuse, psychological abuse that she went through in the house, through the house itself, b through Davidson himself through his fixation with the house, c through the Holloway team and Exploration 4 and her, which kind of doubles back to Davidson, and how she was essentially supposed to be the anchor back in the real world, and then D, the fallout after the end of Navidson returning from Exploration 4, and then the house succumbing to itself and eventually killing Tom. All of that, I feel like, how do you handle that? So, I don't know. I guess to wrap this up, I feel like I've spent too much time talking about Karen. I understand. I don't agree. I don't condone. I understand Karen. And I really strongly disagree with the character that is painted through the critics of the Navidson record, the fictional critics. and feel like she is a tragic character that is kind of dragged through the coals for not only her faults but Navidson's faults as well. Like she's supposed to carry both of them and smile. Her fake beautiful smile that is perfectly symmetrical or whatever whatever the whole thing he goes into about the perfectness of her smile when she was a model. All of that. And I think I don't want to go as far as to say Karen is. I don't think she's my favorite character in the Navidson record, but I think she is the most interesting character in the Navidson record because you get two different stories being told side by side inside of House of Leaves about who she is and who she appears to be, and I think it's really well done. But it also just kind of makes me angry because it does kind of feel like it bleeds a little bit of misogyny in the form of the critics, even the female critics, where it's I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of rambling at this point, so I guess I'm gonna end it there and say I thought Karen was a beautifully written character that felt very real, very human, and yeah. Anyways,
No, I think that was very good. I mean, I agree with all of that. I think Karen is. I think in a lot of ways she is kind of a key to understanding the House of Leaves as a text. You know, she kind of exemplifies, and this is something that I've hit on a couple times, but it's this idea of I think in some ways the house is a metaphor, and the hallways are a metaphor for what happens to traumatized people, and how it creates these facets and this darkness and this emptiness within them that is very kind of inaccessible, and it kind of just lingers. Is this hidden dimension within someone, and I think Karen, especially. I mean, I don't know. We can get to the plot summary, or not that we really usually do a strict plot summary, but we can kind of get into this a little bit again later. But I think one of the things that is like how she finds Navidson and their moment, after as they're reunited.
I
think
that section.
that is a very that is a very poignant moment and a very beautiful moment in a way. Like they are both these broken people. Navidson broken in his own way. Has always sort of I guess seeking approval from a parent, from an absent, or not absent, but a narcissistic parent figure that he that void that he was never able to fill. He was kind of lost in it, and I think that last journey of his into the house, especially because it was in part in a reaction to like feelings of inadequacy that he felt because Tom, who society would have deemed to be kind of like this lackadaisical figure, this coward, this failure. Tom sacrifices his life to protect Daisy, to save Daisy from the house. At that point, this was after the extraction of the Holloway team, or the remnants of the Holloway team rather, and they're leaving, and the house is reacting in some sort of way to, it seems like, to destroy and kill them. I think that I don't really know how or why it is choosing to do that, but it is clear in that moment that it is trying to kill them, and so he sacrifices his life to free Daisy and to get her out of the house, but and in so doing, obviously that is a heroic and selfless action, and Navidson is grateful for it, but also it creates in him this sense of inadequacy. He's like, you know what, my brother, he sacrificed himself to save my daughter, and where was I? He was like, I didn't do that. So it was, and I think that really stuck with him, and you can see that in his conversations with or it was kind of like in a Hemingway-esque iceberg theory kind of way. You see that the sort of it looms in like all of his interactions that we see after Karen takes the kids and goes back to New York. All of his interactions with Reston, his interactions with Karen, because they do communicate a bit, and then ultimately, and his choice to return to the house. It's a form of seeking atonement, of seeking being worthy, and so and that it drives him into this obsession that is governed really his whole life up to that point, right? That search of doing something of note, something of import. So and his obsession takes him into the house, and he. So in his failure to be able to escape the house, I think and Karen meeting him in that moment, and then their mutual sort of their love and their bond, their closeness, that being the thing that brings Navidson out of the house, and Karen out of the house, because she goes to find Navidson. I think that is kind of like the thesis, I guess, of sorts of the House of Leaves. It kind of it epitomizes everything. It epitomizes like the negative, the id, the negative self that exists within everybody, the trauma, etc. And how that is transcended. They're able to escape from that darkness, that cold, that oppressiveness through their mutual love. But yeah, I think that's really just like that's what House of Leaves kind of is. It's a lot of things. It's an academic satire. It's a little bit of a horror novel, a psychological horror novel, I guess. But I think at its heart, there is a at least within the course of the Navidson record. We could talk a little bit about Johnny as well, if you'd like. But the point of the Navidson record is it is in a certain way a love story.
Yeah, I think the most important takeaway, at least thematically, is I guess the strength of the bond between Karen and Navidson, and how even through something as traumatic as the house on Ash Tree Lane, which threatened to destroy their marriage, and, well, not marriage, their relationship, they weren't married yet, which it did for the better part of a year, it also ultimately brought them closer than ever, which ended up leading them finally getting married, officially. And having, as Zampano calls it, the closest thing they have to a happily ever after, even though Navidson is horribly disfigured from Exploration 5. So, yeah, I think that is an important takeaway. Which, I do gotta say, the story of the Navidson record is really good. I loved it. I thought it was a real page turner when it was focusing on it. When you got off onto all of this literary bullshit of, as so and so claimed in their article about this, and then all of that just blurb of, and I think the analysis of this is that, and then all of the weird kind of pseudo intellectual things that Zampano would get into. It was a pace killer for me personally, and eventually it just kind of made it to where I stopped caring, not about the Navidson record, but just about that particular section of the book. But the Navidson record itself, the story that it was told, the story of Will Navidson and the house on Ash Tree Lane, was great. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I don't have a point. I don't know. I'm just praising it right now, I guess is my point. So yeah, I love the way that it ended. I felt very satisfied. I liked. I one thing I will give Danielewski is he is able to vividly paint the image of what we're seeing, which, I mean, this is praise you would give to any competent writer. You read the book and you can vividly imagine what's happening. That's just a sign of a good author, period. But with the Navidson record in particular, since so much of it is shrouded in literal darkness and metaphorical darkness too, the ability to just so finely craft it to where at no point do I not feel like I have such a vivid imagination of what I'm reading and how it looks, and I'm able to just really kind of feel like I'm there in the moment watching this film, quote unquote, watching this film with Navidson. I don't know. I just think it was really cool. I loved the writing, even if I hated some of the prose.
No, we definitely have to give Danielewski quite a bit of credit here for definitely in his descriptions of things. I think he's like you say that there is a certain sort of baseline competency that you are expecting when you're reading something that's been professionally written and published and edited and all that. But I think there's a certain richness in Danielewski's descriptions. Like, he's able to make this what should be a very I'm going to be honest and say uninteresting kind of mental image of, like, it's a dark hallway, you know. And he's able to describe it in such a way that it is very fascinating, and he's able to give a lot of texture to a space that he describes as, largely very samey, and he does it in a various ways, like his like during Navidson's solo exploration, he does a great job of he does his postmodernist thing about how he's using the words to create a sense of things, in a literal sense. Like, so it said when it was talking about him entering that hallway, and he's creating a hallway, like, with arranging the words, and he's talking about Navidson, after squeezing through and crawling through this tightening kind of area, and the prose kind of, or the words on the page kind of start to compress, and then there's fewer and fewer on them. I think he does a really good job of, like, not just the descriptions in his actual written work, but he just does a great job of really putting you there. And I think he definitely deserves a lot of credit. That would be the basis of a lot of my recommendation of the book to someone.
Yeah, it's something that is. I want to say it's greater than the sum of its parts, but if you look at its parts individually, you get an at best mixed bag. But when you look at it as a whole, it's nothing short of honestly just impressive.
And it is definitely one of the most impressive books I've read, I would say.
Yeah, for a book that, after finishing it, my thought process was, I don't ever want to read this again. I don't feel like any other book I would leave with that mentality I would feel this positively about. Despite the fact that my overall view on this book is very mixed, I still feel like it was a very positive experience, even if I could go as far as to say there's at least 15 to 20% of this book that I just straight up hated. So, it's interesting. I don't really think there exists a book quite like this. I don't know. It's such an anomaly for me, and maybe it's because I'm not quite the learned person that I thought I was or pretended to be when I was a teenager or in my early 20s. Like, I don't know. Since most of my literary past has evolved, not evolved, has revolved around mostly sci-fi fantasy fiction. I grew up on shit like Harry Potter, Aragon, Lord of the Rings. And as I matured, it became things like The Witcher or Stephen King. So there's a lot of. Granted, I'm not trying to say that these are necessarily childish or immature novels to read. It's definitely more along the line of entertainment fiction, and
Mhm.
not literary fiction. I've never been one for literary fiction. I've never really tried, but I just don't think I'm. I don't want to say I don't think I'm smart enough, because I don't think it's a question of intelligence. I think it's a question of prior knowledge and motivation and persistence. At
Mhm.
least that's my understanding as someone who hasn't really read literary fiction. Because you kind of, depending on the book you're reading, I feel like you kind of have to go in prepared for what it's covering, so you're not just doing like I'm doing when I'm looking at these and so said this about the Navidson record, where I'm just staring at it and I'm just like, this is nonsense. Which it may not be nonsense to someone who's more learned than I am, but for me it's just nonsense, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, cool, moving on. So that's why I've never really tried to approach literary fiction. So a book like House of Leaves was very, very out of my wheelhouse, to say the least. But it was, I don't know, I don't see myself suddenly becoming an avid literary fiction reader, but I do appreciate this book for what it is. And man, I don't know.
Well, speaking of Stephen King and that kind of thing about the distinction between genre fiction and literary fiction, I thought that this was kind of an interesting passage where he is quoting a fictionalized Stephen King. This comes from the portion what others have thought of the Navidson record, where the part where Karen is she's shopping around the Navidson record. She's trying to get some opinions on it. This is a part of her conversation with Stephen King, where King says, "Symbols, schmimbles. Sure, they're important, but well, look at Ahab's whale. Now there's a great symbol. Some say it stands for God, meaning, and purpose. Others say it stands for purposelessness and the void. But what we sometimes forget is that Ahab's whale was also just a whale." So I think there's I'm kind of curious at what Danielewski is saying there. Is that like a little bit of a jab at Stephen King? Is that kind of like a jab at like more traditional genre fiction? You know.
I took that more as a. I don't think it's so much a dig at Stephen King, more so as it's a dig at people that overanalyze. Because, like he said, yeah, there's a lot of metaphors you can take from the white whale and even Ahab and Ishmael and all that. But at the end of the day, it's also you have to stop looking so metaphorically and also look literally as well. And while the whale may symbolize a lot of things for Ahab, it's also just a whale. Like I don't think it's so much a critique on Stephen King as more so it's a critique on people just being overly analytical and trying to put deeper meaning to something that just simply doesn't exist.
Could be, and that could be. He could be very correct in that, in his because that it comes into that was his analysis of the footage, and of the house. That may just be the best way to look at the existence of the house, which is never at any point during the novel really fully elucidated. Um, it's just the house. It is the unknown and perhaps the unknowable. You know, we see the existence of the house dates back to the some of the Jamestown colonists
Yes.
even found the house, which I thought was an interesting thing, and I would kind of want to talk about a little bit whenever we circle back to Johnny. But it represents something that is, so obviously, you know, it predates the lives of all the humans concerned here, and the United States. I think that was kind of a way to kind of, I guess, for an American audience, kind of be like, But look, I mean, look seriously how old this house is. It's so old and ancient. I mean, I feel like my question is, I'm sure the natives of the region must have encountered the house in some way, and I'm sure a lot of our Icelandic viewers and our other European friends would say, 1600s. That's not really that old. So I guess it's kind of I guess my question becomes then it's like I think he's trying to hint at the ancientness and unknowability of the house, but it's difficult within the context that he has and the context of the characters and the settings to really establish a knowable basis for the house, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is my last little bit. Maybe we'll go back to Karen because this is a decidedly pro Karen Green podcast. The one thing that gave me a little bit of pause was how weirdly flirtatious a lot of the people that Karen was trying to talk to about the house were, and I think that is another little aspect of that I think Danielewski is trying to bring to light. There is like they're having a hard time taking her seriously because of their feelings towards her in terms of like their romantic attraction or physical attraction. So she's not they're not really taking her seriously. Although I would like to point out. Stephen King is one of the characters that is in that portion that I think does not come off as a creep. So
Yeah.
I guess maybe that's one thing maybe that's another reason why maybe you are right in that Danielewski is not really taking a dig at Stephen King there, because I think he is one of the few figures there that comes off in a positive light.
Yeah, and as a fan of King, both as a fan of his work and a fan of what I understand of him as a person, I found that a little funny. I felt very... when I was reading those sections, I could absolutely believe that this was something that Stephen King actually said. So credit to Danielewski for that.
He did a really good job of capturing King's voice. If you've heard him in like interviews and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess it's something that you can kind of say is a credit to this novel that we've been sitting here talking for over half an hour now, purely about conceptual ideas behind this book, themes, metaphors, what have you, and we've barely touched on anything that even remarkably involves plot. Because this is a book that it's not the longest book, despite the fact that this copy has, like 709 pages, which, to be fair, I would argue that this novel actually only has 528 pages.
The last numbered page is 709, you are correct.
Yeah, so the last numbered page is 709, but I would argue that the novel House of Leaves ends on page 528. But even despite that, realistically, this book is somewhere in the ballpark of like 300 to 350 pages, just as a pure estimate, just going off of how many pages are just not full pages. Maybe even less than that. I don't know. This is pure conjecture. There are a decent number of pages that are... a decent number of chapters, rather, that are 15 to 30 plus pages, and they're all full pages. So this is all rough estimates. But anyways, my point being is, for a book that honestly is not near as long as it appears, it is very dense. There is so much to take from it, to read into, and probably overanalyze. I have to wonder if part of what Danielewski was trying to do was turn the readers into those critics that he is, I would go as far as to say, lampooning with...
I think he's trying to turn them into Johnnies. Not in the fullness of turning them into Johnny, but like, you know what I mean? Turn them into Johnny in the sense that they're really digging down and they're cross-checking these things Because I think a lot of the critics, as you point out, a lot of what they're saying, I would go so far as to say is nonsense, or in many cases is deliberately missing the point, or not seeing the forest for the trees.
Yeah. So I feel like there really is a lot to take away about this book, and I do understand now, having finished it, why it has such a strong legacy 22 years later. Both, or I guess almost 23 years now. Uh, like both through the internet and through literary channels. It's just, it's just weird. I don't know what to really, how to really classify this book. It's just such a strange book, and it's enthralling and frustrating and really good and really bad, and it's just so many things all at once that it almost just kind of feels like, I don't want to sit here and try and get all like pseudo intellectual, but it almost feels like an almost allegory for just kind of how messy life as a whole is. It's very much an extreme, because we have the supernatural extreme of the Navidson record, but it's also a tale about a struggling relationship going hitting its rock bottom and rising from that and becoming stronger than it's ever been. And then we also have on the other side of that coin the Johnny Truant story, which is about obsession, addiction, and all of these other things that can quite literally ruin your life and other people's lives around you, and how it can create monsters from nothing, ostensibly. It's I feel like there's a lot of allegory you can take from this book and apply to life, and this may just be me overanalyzing it, and like I said, becoming one of those critics that I was critiquing a minute ago. But I don't know. I don't know.
No, I think you're dead on. I think that's exactly what you are supposed to be taking from it, or at least that is what Danielewski's original intent was supposed to be. I mean, depending on how one feels about the whole death of the author thing, but I think that was Danielewski's original intent.
Yeah. So really good book as a whole. Very very well written. Very well. I don't know what else to say.
All
This
right,
book is just it's something else is the best way I can put it. It's hard to describe.
but I think we've covered um, the Navidson portion of this story pretty well. One thing I would like to talk about a little bit more is what's happening with our old pal Johnny Truant, who we didn't really talk a lot about last time because that was when the Navidson record was really heating up. But I think this story, the story of House of Leaves, the metatextual story about the story, is kind of the story of Johnny Truant and the story of how he assembles the book and how it is disseminated into the world.
Yeah. If you had to guess, would you say this book is more about Will Navidson or more about Johnny Truant?
It's a good question. I think at its heart, it is about that moment that we just talked about with Navidson with the Navidsons. It's like this idea of of this of love and like mutual love and this sort of overcoming, that overcoming your demons, your obsessions, that kind of thing. I think that if I'm going to if you I think if you're going to have any takeaway from the book, that is it. I think Johnny's story provides a very interesting sort of metatextual. It's a frame story, of sorts for the Navidson record. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with your assertion about the frame story. I do think on the surface you're supposed to take this as a story about the documentary of the Navidson record with a kind of backseat interrupter with Johnny Truant, but I do think that the Navidson record is used as a bit of a conduit to tell the deeper story of whatever the hell it is that Johnny Truant's life became. Because it does seem like we get a deeper, more personal, and more fleshed out story with Johnny Truant than we do with the Navidson record, and I think that's just the nature of how it's formatted and established. But
It's the writing style too. It's Davidson is third person omniscient. Uh, we can question the how the accuracy of that third person omniscient narrator Zampano, who with uh, occasional inputs from Johnny, because we know that he is in some parts tweaked what Zampano has written, and we're not. It's not always fully clear which he has tweaked. And with Johnny, you're seeing everything from his perspective directly. You know, his feelings, his emotions, his obsessions. You know, his sensations, that kind of thing.
yeah, there's a term for it. Let me see if I can't find it real quick. Because there's a bunch of different categories for writing for first person, third person, and second person.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can't either find or remember what it's called. I can't remember specifically what it's called. I know there's different types of writing with first, second, and third person. Like for third person, there's like you said earlier, third person omniscient. And then there's, I'm now drawing a blank on all of these, but there's the first person type ones, and there's one that is the style of writing for it is done through journals. Think something like the
Hold on. Let me think. I know what that is. Epistolary.
Yeah, that's it. Third, first person epistolary, where it's done through like journal entries, something like Diary of Anne Frank. I think it's safe to say that's what we're looking at with.
Well, but Diary of Anne Frank was an actual diary of an actual girl. Like an example of epistolary would be like Dracula.
Well, my point being though is that it's a first person tale told through journal entries. Like that one is not fiction, but it's still that type of. It's journal entries.
Okay. I can see what you mean then.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that's what we're looking at with Johnny Truant's story, as opposed to the third person omniscient that we're getting through the Navidson record. But
yeah, I think that does account for the difference in a lot of the qualities of the writing, and it could just come down to kind of the differences in that perspective.
yeah, and I said this I think all the way back in the first episode, maybe it was the second. I don't remember. It's been a while. But I do still believe that Johnny is an unreliable narrator, and we still get plenty of examples of that through him describing things that are happening only for him to say that didn't happen, with things like, what was it, the monster coming and ripping him apart, but then there was no monster and he was still intact, or I think that was one of them. I could be confusing that with something else. But then there was the one where he goes outside of his apartment and there's a truck that hits him, and the only thing that goes through his mind is, it's gonna total my car, and then it hits his car and it hits him and all that. But then there was no truck, there was no damage, there was no injury. Or later on when he's in his apartment, or no, he's in the hotel, and this is after we are told he killed the. Correct me on how to say this if you know would it be the Donsk man?
I think it's Gdansk.
The G is it's a hard G.
I think it's the G is pronounced.
Well,
I think.
I'm gonna trust.
Hold
you.
on, let me look it up.
Is it Gdansk? Gdansk.
That is. I don't even know if Gdansk. I feel weird even saying it. Like I'm just gonna say Gdansk. And be wrong.
It says city in Poland, and Google is saying Gdansk, or Gdansk. Let me hear it again.
Okay.
Gdansk. Gdansk. I'm very sorry. Any Polish person that may or may the hypothetical, the Schrodinger's Polish person that's listening to this. Google's telling me Gdańsk, Gdańsk, Gdańsk. So that's what I'm gonna go with. The Gdańsk man, uh, saying that Johnny
To
killed
to
him. Sorry.
Yeah, that was he was the to clarify in case someone might have forgotten. He is Kyrie's boyfriend.
Kyrie's fiance and then eventual husband. Kyrie being
Oh yeah.
the woman he goes to get the German translation, but then ends up having sex with her on the hills instead. I almost said the Vinewood Hills because I know Grand Theft Auto geography better than Los Angeles geography. And then does not get the German, and then she tells the Gdańsk man about her impropriety and blames Johnny and Lude for it. And now he's on the warpath for both of them. Puts Lude in the hospital, and then finds Johnny, and Johnny beats the shit out of him by getting a cheap. Granted, the Gdańsk man got a couple cheap shots in first, but still, Johnny gets the Jack Daniels bottle, cracks him over the head, and then beats him senseless.
Well, I'm just gonna say, I don't really feel bad. Look, Johnny, you could say he took it too far, almost killing him, or actually killing him if you believe, depending on which version of the events you choose to believe. But I'm gonna say I did not feel bad for that guy at all. I mean, come on, he's looking for trouble and he found it. Like he's picking on literally the lowest rung of our society. A guy who is clearly mentally unwell and homeless, and then he I don't know. I found that I found that very distasteful. The Gdansk man.
Yeah, but to add to the unreliable narrator, when we first get to that section, Johnny implies that he kills the Gdańsk man, kidnaps, rapes, and kills Kyrie, which at that point I was just, man, I was like, man,
Oh yeah.
this is Johnny has gone past the deep end and has now gone into the undiscovered, unexplored section of the ocean floor for me. Like, wow, what a drop. But then later on, he goes back to that, and instead what happens is before he actually, because we're left on him kind of saying he gets to a point to where he stops her when she's coming at him to attack him, and then he scares her, and then from there he says, this is what I did to them. But then we go back to that moment, and then it's like something made him stop, and then she leaves with the Gdańsk man, and they drive away. And
I want to believe that that's what happened.
I'm more inclined to believe that that is what happened, because that thing also leads to the bit where once again we have a situation where he's telling us that there's people beating at the door, he has the guns ready, and they're going to bust in because they knew what he did in the hotel, and then there were no police or no people, there was no banging, there was no one at the door at all. Just another one of those situations where, like with the car hitting him in his car, we're told something's happened, but it's a hallucination or just his imagination running wild, and that's actually not what's going on.
That's one of the things that kind of made some of the Johnny sections hard for me to read, because I would read, and be like, wow, okay, so this is happening, and then he kind of like stops short, and then it feels like it was a whiplash effect.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, well then what the heck did I just read?
And I feel like the entirety of chapter 21 is just a really, it's a nice kind of summation of what you kind of get from the Johnny Truant storyline, because it is done through literal journal entries, and it's jumping all around in time because it starts in October, I think, and
then, it starts in October. That's the incident with the Gdańsk man.
Yeah,
and then it goes back.
Yeah, then he realizes, wait a minute, I'm forgetting things that are at the front of this book that were apparently months ago, and then it's back to May, where it's him actually going to Virginia and trying to find the house, which is when we get into the whole Jamestown thing, where you have the settlers who apparently are using F's instead of S's, and they find the stairs in the woods.
It wasn't... they're not actually using an F. I think it's called the long S.
Yeah, the editor
but
goes
it
into
looks
that.
like an F.
Yeah, there's a little bit by the editor that goes into that, on how it's actually a mistake on Johnny's part when he's sitting there talking. Which I do find it really funny how at that bit on Johnny's section of the footnote. This is actually, I guess, in chapter 20. In Johnny's section of the footnote, he's using F's instead of S's on a bunch of words, and I just thought that was just a really funny, petty moment from Johnny. I got a good kick out of
I,
that.
I I thought that was actually very funny too. Because it reminded me of something, especially when we were younger, that we would have done.
Yeah, but we have the journal entries of back to May, and then we have this entire section about his friends in Seattle who are both doctors, the couple, and how they help him recover, and he's healthy again, and he has these shiny yellow pills that are just a cure-all. And I'm reading this, and I'm thinking that is a very convenient pill, but I guess that makes sense as to why he's suddenly able to take on the Gdańsk man when for all accounts he's supposed to be emaciated and just on not ostensibly on death's door. But then it turns out that he's like, no, I made this all up. I spent 2 hours writing this not to trick you, but to trick myself. And so none of that happened. But then once again, to jump way ahead, because chapter 21 is the end of the Johnny Truant storyline. We get the final couple pages where he's telling a story he was told from his fictional doc friend in Seattle about the baby born with the holes in its brain. And that's the end of the story, is the story about the baby with the holes in his brain. And the mother spending 4 days sitting with the baby, not sleeping, not eating, and talking to the baby, only for her to finally be, I guess, at peace and tell the baby, you can leave now, and then the baby dies. And as a father, that was just not sorry. As a NICU father, that was not fun to read, because my son was in the NICU for 3 months, and that was just such a hard time for my wife and I, and it was really stressful. So to kind of read that hit pretty close to home for me, because we didn't have we were lucky enough to where our son was developed enough to where the NICU was just there for him to fully mature into full infancy, and we didn't have any problems, and he's a healthy baby, and yay, we're very happy about that. But so we didn't have the issue that this fictional mother had with her baby, but it does. But when you're in that situation, it does create similar fears, where every day you're worried about getting a phone call or coming in and there being issues. And we were even told from the get-go, don't expect every day to be a good day. Try to prepare for possible bad days, but at the same time understand that a bad day does not necessarily mean that something bad is happening, so to say.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, to round off the point and to not make this so much about me, that particular bit, the end of Johnny Truant's story, hit a little close to home for me. So that was a very kind of powerful moment for me. But to get around to the point, we have that story from him that he says is from his doc friends, who he already told us earlier didn't exist. So I really do find it hard to take a lot of what Johnny says as fact, even the band with the, I can only assume, printed out copy of House of Leaves, which is a very meta moment in the story. It feels almost
I
too
don't
meta.
know. I think this is something that this could be totally and completely off base. So I apologize if anybody more knowledgeable about the history of the House of Leaves is listening to this and is just blanching at it. But I feel like that is almost, because my understanding of the story of the House of Leaves is this version that we're reading, this described as the remastered full color edition, is not the original edition that kind of made its way around, and that it was something of a phenomenon in the sort of the art world, the music world, especially in Los Angeles. But it was kind of a little bit of an internet phenomenon, and that is something that we kind of mentioned, I think, back in that first episode when we were talking about Ted the Caver and all that stuff.
As I understand it, this is at the very least the second edition.
I think that this is probably an edition that comes here, and that it is kind of a one last sort of meta textual moment from Danielewski to kind of round off. So I'm inclined to believe that within the context of the story, it did happen. But again, this is Johnny's stories are a choose your own reality almost at times. So I think there could be more or less truth to it. Um, I do think it did kind of rub me a little bit the wrong way. I'm gonna be real honest here. When Johnny is talking to people who have the copy of the book, the first edition, and I think that it's one thing I would like to understand better is in that conception of reality. How did the book disseminate? Did Johnny just disseminate it one day and just somehow like in a fugue state and somehow forget? I guess my question is how did that happen?
I'm of two minds in that particular thing. I think that it's either A, what you said, where Johnny, without knowing it, because we can't trust him and he can't trust himself, has been releasing all of these sections as he's doing them. Because, as I understand it, how the book was initially released, or at least teased for its official release, was it was being released piecemeal on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So my assumption is either Johnny was doing that and not realizing he was doing that, which is very much in the realm of believability, and it does not necessarily have to be stated for it to be true, because Johnny is not someone we can rely on to state fact. So it could be that, or, and I find this one less likely but still possible, while he was traveling to Virginia and keeping his journal logs, he put the trunk with the House of Leaves in the storage unit that he paid for. And when we get to the scene where he's at the bar talking with the band, and they're talking about the book together, and they're like, oh man, I wonder if Johnny ever made it to Virginia, if he ever found the girl who falls in love with his ironies and all of that. I wonder if in those couple of months of time from him leaving LA to him coming back to LA, someone got into that storage unit, found it, uploaded it, and then put it back. Like I said, this is a little more far-fetched. Oddly enough, this feels a little more far-fetched than the idea of Johnny uploading it to the internet and forgetting that he uploaded it to the internet. But it still feels a little more far-fetched than that. It still feels a little more far-fetched that somebody broke into his storage unit, stole it, uploaded it, and then returned it. But I feel like that's kind of, if we're going to believe that this actually happened, I feel like those are the two possibilities that I've come up with as to how this could have happened.
That I think that could be. I think that it could be that kind of hews a little bit close to. I don't know. I don't want to get into this too much because I'm not super knowledgeable about it. But this was something that I did see while I was reading about things after we completed the novel. Apparently, this had been optioned at one point to be a TV show, right? And at one point, and one of the plot points, I think at the original conception of the show was it was supposed to take place in present day. So we're not in the time of the Navidson record and all that. It takes place in like the present day, and there one of the plot points was that there is this company that is being paid by someone or something to cover up the existence of Navidson, of the house on Ash Tree Lane, of everything. So, I mean, obviously he didn't have that idea at that point, but if we can take the extended world of the novel into account, maybe that is a thing. Maybe there is a group of people, some assassins and Templars of, if you'll forgive the analogy, who are trying to spread knowledge about the house, and those that are trying to suppress it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's kind of that is kind of the I don't know that there's either. However, the book did end up disseminated in the world of House of Leaves. I just want to say it did rub me the wrong way just a little bit when they were talking and that when he was talking to the band and that guy who was recommending it to Johnny was like, "Hey man, you need to check this out. It'll change your life." It's like, okay, Danielewski, come on, come on, like. It did rub me the wrong way a little bit, even fictionally writing about his life as being life changing.
Yeah, I do I can give a little bit of a pass there because I think it's supposed to be a joke in the sense that it's Johnny's life has been altered very much for the worse because of this book, and it's really changed
Oh,
his life. And then he finds it in the wild, and the band's just like, "Bro, read this; it'll change your life." And it's just one of those. It's just one of those ironic moments where it's just like, "Oh yeah, will it, huh?"
okay, never mind. I have to rescind my comment. That I think that's okay. I'm actually on board now. I think that's a pretty nice use of irony that just totally blew past me.
Yeah, I got a good chuckle out of that. That was pretty funny to me.
But yeah, I just we talked a lot about in the beginning our feelings about Karen, but I definitely feel that way. But Johnny was another character that I just really felt bad for the whole time. It was almost he almost feels like he is destined, and perhaps living in America, he is kind of destined into the life that he ultimately finds himself into this sort of homelessness and absolute destitution, while being beset by the unimaginable terror of schizophrenia and that kind of these extreme mental issues.
Yeah. Which, if I could really quickly jump aside here, I feel like I would be remiss not to bring up some of the assertions that I made in previous episodes, and since we were done with the book, acknowledge how, I guess, to not mince words, how wrong I was. But to be fair, I think the issue that I was having with both my assertions of is Johnny and Zampano the same person, or if they're one of them exists and the other doesn't, and about the other one being about the physicality of the monster and whether it killed Zampano and whether it slashed Johnny on the back of the neck in the tattoo shop. Uh, I feel like I can safely say that I was wrong in my theories and my assertions, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
nothing is ever definitively stated one way or the other. Like the monster, the Minotaur,
Mm-hmm.
is never really given any physical form. Even when Holloway kills himself in Exploration 4, it's a shadow that consumes him. He's there and then he's not. And even when Karen is going into the house to save Navidson in Exploration 5, it is just a shadow that encompasses the entire wall that she walks into and then closes, taking her and her children's pictures that were on the wall with it. And then in the quote unquote real world, the only thing we ever really get to suggest that this monster is real are through Johnny's hallucinations and assertions. So we don't really get anything definitive one way or the other. And I guess this was me trying to try and find some theories that would put a bow and wrap up these storylines in a neat manner, and that's just not the story that was being told here. So it's not me to say that I'm disappointed that I don't get the answers that I was asking in the past, or that I don't get a definitive yes or no to my theories. It's just I feel like I do need to mention that in the book that we have, I think I can say that I was wrong, but we don't ever truly get answers one way or the other. But I think I can safely say that Zampano and Johnny are two separate people, and the monster exists, but only insofar as it exists through Johnny's psychosis.
I think it's supposed to be. Well, I I shouldn't speak too much about this because I'm not really trained in psychology or very knowledgeable even. But I think what we're supposed to apprehend from both the Whalestow letters and his description, the things that he says about his mom, is that she was a schizophrenic woman, and I my belief is that Johnny inherited that, and I think he is not maybe as it's difficult to tell by the time you get to the ending. But I think at least at the beginning he had maybe not had he was not as bad off as his mother, but as we can kind of see closer to the end, he's kind of tipping further and further into and what I had initially interpreted as this was happening to him because of the book, and maybe it is. It's like you said. There's never any. One of the great themes of this book is the unanswered and unanswerable question, and I think that's something that we can kind of come away with. Like, how much was the influence of the book on Johnny? Can we point to that as the genesis of his issues, or is it really more the development of the onset of the schizophrenia that he had inherited from his mother?
Yeah, because we can even see in universe through the band that while they are hesitant to talk about the book when he brings it up to them in the first place, they still kind of, once they get past that initial hesitation, it's almost kind of like a reverence and almost jovial kind of attitude towards it. Like, hey bro, read this, it'll change your life. It's a thing kind of like that, to where clearly this band, what they get out of it is ostensibly a song and a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And their lives obviously aren't impacted by it, and this has now been spread, we can safely assume at the very least, through the West Coast area.
Well, the band is from Philly, so
yeah, but they were talking about touring through the West Coast and them talking to people about it on the West Coast, and to do a little bit of external application from our world is if I read right, the when this book was initially released through the internet, it was spreading through the West Coast area with its initial popularity before the actual novel hit shelves.
Yeah, that was right.
So, granted, we're not getting a direct view of what Johnny got. We are getting his compilation and his thoughts of it, so we're getting it ostensibly secondhand. So maybe that is a difference, but to say that we are reading what Johnny read and not reacting the same way that he did, even as we are witnessing his decline, I feel like has to at least lend some credence to the idea that there was already a switch that was flipped in Johnny, and this book wasn't so much a catalyst, more so just another. It's essentially oil added to the fire. Like he was already predisposed, and this was just kind of fuel for the fire.
Something that I'm just thinking about. I think schizophrenia often can manifest itself when someone is in their late teens or 20s. That's oftentimes, in many cases, when it will start to manifest. That is definitely in the realm of where Johnny is in his life. He is described as being in his, I think, like mid-20s.
Yeah, I will say I did minor. I'm by no means an expert. I did some minor research because I had a friend who became paranoid schizophrenic in our early 20s, and I watched it happen firsthand. And let me tell you, just as a spectator, just as someone watching it happen to someone else, it's terrifying. So I can't even
Mhm.
begin to imagine what it's like to live through that. And I just, that's a separate story in and of itself. But yeah, so I can definitely sympathize, since I watched one of my closest friends succumb to it, and it ruined his life ostensibly. And that happened to him in his let's see, he would have been 21 when it happened. It
Mhm.
it and with the minor amount of research I did on it, it is most likely to manifest in your like late teens through like mid 20s. That's where most people will get it, if they're not most people will get it, but where it will start showing for people that have it. But it can still manifest at any time. It's just, if you were going to have it and you are like late 20s or 30s, there is a better chance that you are not going to have it. If that makes sense.
Sure, it does.
But I do think it is possible that we are looking at someone having an absolute. I clearly we're watching someone have a complete and total mental health deterioration, but I do have to wonder how much of it is because of the book and how much of it is due to genetic or external factors that have already existed, and the book either sped along or created a plausible excuse to lean on for.
Well, we don't know too much about Johnny's life before the. I mean, we see little snippets of his life before the book. It is possible that he had already kind of had begun showing some signs and symptoms, and that this is just like this was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say, or like it became a fixation that he was, or something that he like that really, I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but like it was the trigger for like all of this kind of coming apart. But yeah, I think I don't know personally. I would hew a little bit closer to this being his schizophrenia, not to create a like a variety of the "it was all a dream" type ending. But I think that, as you said, the fact that other people are reading the book and not having similar effects on them, I would hew closer to um, the things that he experienced, and maybe even some of the story, like not even just like the monster stuff, but at one point he goes to to a bar with Lude, and he meets this woman, and she's like she's a very strange person, very flat affect, um, and she ends up they find a dog outside the nightclub, and they're gonna take it, or she's gonna take him back to his apartment, and he wants to keep the dog, but she's like, well, no, I have a house and a backyard, and it'll be fine, it'll be okay, and he should come with me, and then he's like, oh, well, okay, that makes sense, and then she ends up killing the dog, in a pretty gory way, like she runs over its head, right?
No, no. So she drops him off at his house,
Mm-hmm.
and he says goodbye to her and the dog. And then before she even turns the corner, she just chucks it out the window. And I don't remember if it hits a truck or another vehicle, or if it hits a sign or something, but it slams into something else, some other object, and it caves its head in. And all Johnny hears is the thunk. And then he goes to investigate, and there he finds the dog, and he holds it until it dies. And then he just leaves it, and he puts it on the sidewalk, or back on the street, and is like, well, yeah,
The
obviously,
street sweeper will get it.
yeah, the street sweeper will get it. There's nothing I can do. and it's almost a kind of nihilistic approach to it, which I found not necessarily out of character, but very like out of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Is very kind of
I,
strange thing to have him have such a personal connection to that dog and have a essentially a moment with it where he feels that the two of them are somewhat kindred spirits, and then upon seeing it dead moments later on the street, maybe this is him seeing it in a similar way as to how he views his own life, to where the dog is like him, essentially just become trash left for some machine to take away. Maybe
mm-hmm.
that's the takeaway we're supposed to get from it. I don't know, but it is an interesting kind of dichotomy of emotions that he puts on display in the span of what can ostensibly probably be only a few minutes.
My dude, speed running the process of grief.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I just, and then there's also the very, I found very touching moment of him, going back to finding the Whalestow Institute, and then going back into his mother's cell and just spending the night there. I could just, that was, I really felt for him a lot in that moment. I could, but it doesn't really, things like that, but like all like the dog story, the moment with him going back, him having these breaks where he'll lose all sense of reality and proportionality, like the thing with the, I don't remember how to say his name, Gdansk man, the thing with the dog, the thing with
The dying skin, I think.
Yes, thank you, Polish viewers. Please direct all of your opprobrium to me and not Dusty. The him going to his mother's cell and spending the night there. I think all of these are that's where we're supposed to land with Johnny. I think, at least from my perspective, is like the preponderance of evidence would have me believe that he is just a very unfortunate soul who has, he has schizophrenia or some other kind of mental illness, and he is just, because of his station in life, he is not really able to seek treatment for it, and he's able to, and ultimately where we see him is, living as a like an old time 30s hobo, hopping the rails, and I think that's kind of where his story kind of ends. It's like I hope in the world of the House of Leaves that Johnny one day, he was able to get the help he needed, but it definitely, it is a very, to my mind, even though it is there's kind of like a moment where he's seeing the sun rise and he's with this dog who's being very kind to him. That is kind of a hopeful image, but on the whole, his story feels very downbeat and depressing, and it is kind of like the inverse, if you will, of you see the Navidson, like these two people coming together and overcoming their personal tragedies, traumas, and mental, their illnesses of and however they receive them, and you see by contrast, and you can see that they're upper middle or even kind of like wealthy class people, whereas Johnny, he's kind of he's like I've said probably 100 times so far, he lives on the margins. He lives by himself. He's kicked out of his home. He goes to live in a flop house that's surrounded by other people who he describes hearing a lot of screaming in the night and stuff. They're all probably mentally unwell, additionally, and or maybe going through addiction problems of their own. And then he ends up living on the streets, being fully dehumanized and attacked by, physically attacked, and you know, he mentions that people are not wanting to meet his eye. You know, it's a very bleak way to end the story for Johnny, and I think it's very. I guess I've lost the thread of where I'm going here, but I think that's it's a very tragic story.
Well, here's something that I was wondering. So what you're referring to with like him and the dog, that
Mm-hmm.
is, I don't remember the years, so forgive me, but most of his journal entries are around September or October. I'm gonna guess
Mm-hmm.
1998. But then we get this entry that is it's the only entry, and it's in August of 1999, and this is the one where he finds the band, and afterwards he finds the dog, and it ends with him saying, "There's time now, plenty of time, and somehow I know it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right." And then from there, we jump back to October of 1998 immediately. And I think this is when we get the truth of what, or quote unquote, the truth of what happened. Yes, this is between the Gdansk man and Kyrie in that
Mm-hmm.
altercation. And then from there, that leads to what we end up getting with the eventual story about the baby with the holes in its brain. So, and where we end Johnny's story. So us going from earlier, we went from October, and I think maybe a bit into November, and then we went back to May, and then we make it back to October, November, and then we jump forward to the next August, and then we're back again to that previous October, and that's where we end. Since we already in that same chapter had the section with him going to his doctor couple friends in Seattle, and then him saying, "This was a lie. I wrote all of this in 2 hours just to make myself feel like I had some hope." Since we have this entire August entry sandwiched in between October entries from the previous year, do you believe that this August entry actually happened? Or do you think that this is another case of his doc friends in Seattle?
I'm inclined to believe it happened, and what I would how I would account for the looping back to that day, because that's something that he mentions earlier on in that chapter. He's like, "Oh, I looked and I didn't even realize that I'd written, I've been writing since May or something like that." He says something like so he puts in that first entry, that first time we were going through October. He's like, "Oh, I didn't even realize I had all this other stuff in here," and then he recounts that, and then it gets goes and goes until we get to the point where we're in the August portion. I think there's a cyclical nature of his thoughts. He keeps coming back to that time. I think that's why it reappears. It's because in his brain, it is always October 1998, or maybe not always, but sometimes he goes back, kind of flashes back to it. It's something that's really sticks with him, that he's not able to fully, that he's still processing, I guess,
It's
is
an
what I would say.
it's an anchor point.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah, I would say that.
speaking of anchor points, because this is relevant to what I'm about to say, do you think that there's any form of time travel in this book?
Um, I guess it would partially depend on how you would define time travel. I'm sure there is some aspect of time dilation within the house, within the hallways, but I don't know. I may not. Nothing immediately comes to mind when I think about the idea of time travel.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there are. This is just a this is a harebrained tinfoil theory here, but with that anchor point in October, specifically surrounding the Gdansk clan assault, I'm wondering if there are even if they're not actual time branches, like reality time branches, they're mental time branches where you have this flux point in Johnny's mental state surrounding the Gdańsk man and Kyrie, where we have that anchor point of him being attacked and then fighting back against him, and then we have the branching points where there's the one where he kills him, captures, rapes, and murders Kyrie, but then we have the other branching point where he lets them go, and then we have this third branch point where it or maybe it's still just 2 points, but we have the one that leads to him encountering the band and finding the House of Leaves and finding the dog, and him having some sort of morbid sense of hope for the future, despite the fact that we are probably witnessing where the story ends the last couple of months of his life. He probably won't make it to 2000. If I had to guess, maybe he does. I don't know. Maybe he turns around, but we don't have that information. So all we're left with is this homeless man deteriorating slowly. But then we have that other branch point where it's back to them, where he lets them go, and then we end with the story of his Seattle doctor's friends telling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much me suggesting that there is two timelines that split off, one where he kills them and one where he lets them go, and we have these two realities surfacing from them. More so this idea that he has created inside of his mind these two branching realities where one happens and the other happens, and we are witnessing him playing it out, and that's why we have entries going all the way to 1999, but then we immediately cut back to October 98. I don't know, like I said, this might just be a harebrained theory that I'm just kind of throwing out there, just trying to create some pseudo-intellectual thought in discourse and discussion on the House of Leaves that makes it more than what it actually is. I don't know, but it's kind of fun.
No, I
It's
think
fun to think
there's
about.
something to it. I think whether or not these are things that are happening in the moment, I think he definitely, we should interpret the resurfacing of that date as a like you said, like a very key inflection point in his life. And I think while I do believe that I choose to believe anyway that he ended up letting them go. In the moment, there is a part of him that wanted to destroy the both of them. That because of the in the moment, like, lizard brained, I must destroy my enemies kind of situation, combined with whatever mental illnesses he's experiencing, and just combined with like the sense of like ultimate, or maybe there is something to the book getting to him, and I don't know, it's just difficult to say. But I think that you are correct in saying that that date is a real inflection point, and I think it's something that he thinks about a lot, and that's why he writes it in so many times, or he'll go back and he'll recount the events, because it's something that he's always turning over kind of in his mind.
So I guess one final thing to talk about the House of Leaves before we put a bow on it is the appendixes. I think I can safely say we don't need to talk about the glossary here. But the final, what is it, 150, 160 pages of the book are dedicated to the appendix. And you have not gone into this, but I went into it a little bit. And what I feel like I can safely say is that this is supplemental material that is there for you if you want to kind of get more. I don't even want to say more information, because what I read of it, I don't really feel like I left with answers, just kind of more stuff to look at, because not a lot here actually feels concrete or relevant, if that makes sense. One thing I found kind of cool, if you have your book handy, it's page 540. Is
Let me flip to that.
you have Zampano going through chapter titles for each chapter, because in the book we only have the Roman numeral number for the chapters. But on this page, you have this kind of idea that he had for what the name of the chapter would be. I say Zampano, and chapter 21 is entirely Johnny Truant, so take that for what you will. And there is a chapter 21, and it's called Nightmares. But I thought that was kind of fun, just a fun little thing. But then a lot of it is Zampano's just kind of writings and poems that he's written. There's a lot of fun little pictures that you can look at, and sketches and drawings, and some of them look like the original pages. That's kind of cool. But then you get bits of it where there is a collection of poems that I don't think are written by Zampano, and they just kind of exist. And I looked at it, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. If you want some reference, Daniel, it starts on page 574. The title page is 573, but they're called the Pelican Poems. And I looked at this, and I just said no. I'm good. I'm not one for poetry personally. It's not my forte. More power to you if you're into it. Not for me. And it's just a bunch of poems, and I'm good. I thought the collages were fun. I'm just skimming through and reading this. The obituary for Johnny's father was interesting, but the crux of it here is it's section E. It's on page 586, and it's called "The Three Attic Whalestow Institute Letters." And this goes on. I'm going to count the pages here real quick. This goes on all the way to page 644. So we are looking at 59 pages that are letters that Johnny's mom wrote to him from the Whalestow Institute, starting from July 28th, 1982, going all the way to the day before her death. Is that right? Yeah, the day before her death, which was May 3rd, 1989. So almost 7 years worth of letters. And then the final thing we have is the letter that Johnny received on May 5th from the Institute, letting him know that his mother died. So I read more of these than I'd like to admit. I made it to page 600, and then I made it to 1984, and I decided I wanted to see how far this went, and I realized this went on another almost 50 pages, and I decided I think I'm okay not reading this, because if you skim it...
Can I hop in just a second?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm kind of flipping along with what you're saying. One of the letters I found deals with... it looks like it's a letter from his mother from Johnny's mother to him after the portion of the book where he talks about how he starts getting in fights and stuff.
Yes, I know where you're going because I did get that far.
Yeah, that was 540 or 593 and 594. I think that is kind of interesting. That does kind of comport with what I was saying earlier. Like a lot of these things that are come to Johnny, because she's talking about you don't really get this desire to fight from your father or his family. No, you're getting that from me and my side, and she describes them as, you come from a long line of aggressors, some valiant, many downright scoundrels. And she says, describing she's talking about your current lust for physical engagement is the result of this questionable genetic bequeathal. So I think, I don't know, I just wanted to pop in and just one last time and just hit that one. I think if there's anything that we're supposed to pull from these, this is just me looking at one, but it feels like these are just kind of like giving you background about, if there's anything to be mined from these, it's why is Johnny the way he is.
Yeah, and
that kind of thing.
If you jump ahead to let me see where it starts. I'm this is purely going off of just looking at the page and not reading the page. to see where this starts. Um, there is it starts to happen where she signs her letters as either mom or mommy, but there is a time where she starts signing it as P. I didn't read it, so I don't know what that means. But if you look starting somewhere
I think
around,
that's her name. It starts with a P.
uh, that actually could be it. So I didn't go deep into this, but it's around page 623. You start seeing it starts to devolve pretty badly, and it seems like it's written by someone who's manic schizophrenic. Uh, well, that might be assumptions on my part. Someone who's manic and not mentally unwell. We'll just say it that way. And it just really starts to just devolve, and it's just what you would expect from House of Leaves. And that all leads up to her final letter, where she's talking about leaving, and then it ends up she hung herself. So, thoughts about that? That is what I would say is the bulk of the appendixes and the exhibits is the Whalestow Institute letters. I looked into it. It is a novella that Danielewski wrote that he released as a sort of companion to House of Leaves, and and has been included since the second edition of the novel. But the novella that you can get by itself has more letters in it than the House of Leaves version does. I personally, this is my personal opinion, I do not think it is required reading for House of Leaves itself. I don't care to read 50 pages worth of letters. I'm sorry, that's my thoughts on it. Since it was not included in the first edition of House of Leaves, I do not consider it to be part of House of Leaves itself. Hence why you have the book called House of Leaves, which is by Zampano with introduction and notes by Johnny Truant. That's where the book starts. The book is the Navidson record, and then from there you get the exhibits, which are granted from Zampano, and you have the appendixes and all that fun stuff. I don't think it is necessarily required to say you have read House of Leaves. My personal opinion, this is my opinion, someone might disagree with me, is House of Leaves ends on page 528. Everything after that is there for you if you want more. And that's how I feel the appendixes for House of Leaves functions as well. And there's nothing really of major note except for the Whalestow letters, and that exists purely for more context on Johnny Truant's relationship with his mother, which is not relevant to the novel itself. So with that, to have that long-winded thing come to a conclusion, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the appendix and the appendix and the exhibits. So, Daniel, it's there if you want. If you don't ever go through it, I still would say you finished House of Leaves. Those are my thoughts on that to wrap up the appendixes, because I know you can't really speak too much on it outside of just the bare skimming that you've done. So I would not fault anybody for stopping at the end of the Navidson record at the end of chapter 23 and calling it a day. Because you've gotten the story, you've gotten all the information, you can read some poems if you want, but I don't think your understanding of Zampano, Johnny Truant, or the House of Leaves as a whole is going to be greatly impacted more through it. It's just supplemental material, like I said.
Yeah, that's something that I probably plan to look at. I mean, at my leisure. I do want to get everything that this book does have to offer, because I have a lot of respect for. Not saying that anybody that doesn't necessarily have it, but I think this book is with some of my qualifications and stuff. I do think it is quite an achievement. I have enjoyed it. But I do plan on reading it sometime, but I don't know that we're gonna be discussing those in great detail moving forward. But like we said that next time that we would meet and record, that we would have everything from the Navidson record completed. So promises made, promises kept. I think that's we are gonna go ahead and wrap here on the book of House of Leaves.
Yeah, Daniel, do you have any final thoughts for House of Leaves?
I would just say that I think it's a very good book. It's definitely not for everyone, and if I could go back, this is going to sound contradictory, but just hear me out. I would not have chosen this book necessarily for our first jaunt out, because I think that for someone that has a little bit more, they're they're more like they have either more experience or are like freshly in the world of literary analysis. They definitely could have pulled a lot more out of this book, certainly than I did. I think we did a pretty good job. I think we got a lot of it, but I can't help but feel walking away that there is more to be gleaned here. And, I wouldn't mind, going back and reading it again at some point. Once I rebuild my reading stamina and my ability to critically analyze or just do any kind of literary analysis on a text.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like we had a very abridged analysis of the book as a whole because, I think I've said this before in the past that we could talk about this for hours, and we had the first episode, the first three episodes actually, all three of the previous
Right.
episodes. This was purely coincidental, and I talked to you about this, and this actually was going to continue, coincidentally enough, if we would have recorded last week, which we didn't record last week because you had technical difficulties that kept you from being able to record. So we just pushed it back, and we became a bi-weekly podcast once again, with this episode being episode 4. But we were covering 4 chapters per episode, which was not planned. Like I said, it was completely coincidental. And if we would have recorded episode 4 last week, we would have covered chapters 12 through 16. No, I'm sorry, 13 through 16. And it would have kept that trend going. And I thought that was really funny. But with 4 chapters apiece, we talked for 6 hours about this book, and even then, we left each episode talking about it after we stopped recording. That there was more that we could have talked about. There were things we didn't touch on, and I still feel that way right now. Like we didn't even talk about Luke's death, even a little bit today, which we could, but I don't think it's super necessary. But my point being is that this still feels like an abridged analysis. There's still so much we could talk about. There's so much more we could go into. But I don't necessarily feel like it would add to or enhance our analysis or the podcast as a whole if we did spend another 2, 3, 4, 5 hours talking about this book. I think we've touched on all of the major points, how we feel about it, how we interpreted it, and how it kind of exists in our mindscape. So I think anything else is just bonus at this point. I think we've touched it well enough, and I am personally ready to put a bow on it here, and move on to our next novel, which I won't say. You will see for yourself, dear viewer, if you are listening, in the present tense and not coming back and watching this in the past for some weird reason. You will see what that is when it releases, when episode 5 releases in a week or two, depending on our very fluctuating schedule. And I'm really excited for that.
I am quite excited. I think this is going to be this next one. If I could just pull back the curtain just a little bit, but not give it anything away, I think it's going to be a pretty big change of pace, both in terms of like the novel itself, and potentially I don't know that it'll there might be some changes also in the general shape, but of our discussions, but either way, I'm very excited for the next book, and I don't know. I think we're all gonna enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah. So if I had to say one last thing about House of Leaves, I would not recommend it unless you know what you're getting into, unless you know what this book presents, at least formatically. If that's I don't think that's a word, but I'll roll with that. Not so much the plot wise, how it goes with the plot. You don't need to know too much, but if you just understand how this book works, what you're getting into, and understand that it may not always be the most engaging or interesting read. If you're understanding that and you're okay with that, then I would recommend this book to you. If any of that sounds like it might be daunting or boring or uninteresting, it really kind of comes down to your preference and I don't think this is a book that you should be ashamed about DNFing.
No, I like I said, I like before this is my second crack at the book. The first time I didn't finish. Yeah, like I've said in the earlier episodes, I got to about maybe where we were in the second episode, if I had to guess. But yeah, this is definitely my second crack at it. So I think it's something that's, you might not be ready for it now, or it's something that you should approach when you feel that you're ready for it, instead of just necessarily rating it like, oh, it is considered a really good book from one of the better 21st century books, so I need to read it. I would say read it when you feel like you're ready for it.
Yeah, which I do want to say really quickly. I find it funny that we're saying this as if we are speaking to somebody as a means to try and recommend or don't recommend the book for them to read, in a podcast where we have spoken about the book at length with full spoilers. So if somebody has not read this book, has listened to all 4 episodes of this podcast with us spoiling it and discussing it, and then is like, yeah, I want to read this book, they're kind of going into it already having a really broad generalization of what they're getting into and what's going to be inside of this book content-wise. So I just find that kind of funny. That's like, I would not recommend this to you unless after spoken about it for 8 hours on the plot.
Well, some people aren't so sensitive about spoiler stuff, and for some people, I think honestly, the things that we've said might make or break, how someone might, like there's some difficult stuff in here that we've touched on, and if that's not your bag, maybe give it a miss, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think some people that for some people it's not as big a deal.
Yeah, but yeah, final words on it. This was a great book. This was a masterclass in writing. I think Danielewski did a great job. I think he's a phenomenal writer. I think he wrote a very enthralling story, despite me having a lot of issues with a lot of parts of it. I'm coming off very positive at the end of the day. Despite me giving it a 7 out of 10, that is a very strong 7 for me. I am glad we read this. I am also glad to be done with it.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that does it for us though today. I think we have drained as much blood from this rock as we can.
Yep, sounds about right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we look very forward to seeing you guys next time.
Yep, with a new book and a new lease on life.
Stay tuned.